Enriched in everything. Each and every year during the month of February, we examine how God has given us particular resources in our life and how we can best steward that. The month of February is normally our month that we examine stewardship, and this year's theme is exactly that: enriched in everything. And our theme verse that we are using for this year is 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 10 and 11, where it says, "Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God." Truly being enriched in everything, and how we can take that and learn how to obey God with our resources that He has given us to best steward our life in a way that it is honoring to Him. Last week, we looked on the fact that we have a giving God. And we've considered the many ways that He has been generous to us, and extremely generous. And if you happen to miss that lesson, you can certainly go back, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, and go to the archive section, and you can find last week's lesson. This is a 4-part lesson, and so this is the second one, and I invite you to listen to all of them so that we can understand that everything that God has given us is for a purpose, and He has an expectation for us in this matter of stewardship. So last week we saw that we have a very giving God, an extremely generous God. We saw really where our view of God and the type of view that we have of God really affects our pursuit of Him. And we talked about how do we view God as just this distant being so far from us, or even this type of Santa Claus where it's checking a list and the good and the bad things, but rather how we view God as a extremely generous creator and a generous God, and all the things that He's been generous to us with, and that includes especially His Son. And understanding that we are truly the benefactors of His generosity. And so last week, we looked at several of those things and talked about a giving God. And this week, we're looking at our part, talking about living giving and living out what has been given to us. We used this verse last week, and we'll kind of examine it a little further this week in the book of Genesis. We looked a little bit at the creation story. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says, "And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them." And so last week we examined this verse, talking about how generosity doesn't just affect us, but rather it affects everything that is around us. But God is an extremely generous God. And because I am created in His image, right? In the image of God created He him. Because I am created in His image, I then have the DNA of God's generosity living within me, and therefore it is a part of me that should be dying to get out. Now we understand, because of the effects of sin, and we'll talk about that a little bit, because of the effects of sin and the now accursed nature of man and sinfulness, and wherefore by one man did sin enter into the world, and we understand that we're all sinners. However, we also know that we were created in the image of God. And for us as children of God, we've placed our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and He lives within us. There is a part of Him that is generous, and therefore the generosity should want to flow out. The definition, really, by definition, the Webster definition of generous is to be liberal in giving. It's to be very liberal in giving. And we're not just simply talking about finances here. We're talking about those things, time, resources, all those things that God has given us. But giving truly is an important part of humanity. It can even be said that we can't really truly live how God would have us to give until we are generous. Why? Because generosity is essential to full living the way that God intended for us to do that. So let's look at a few things here to help us understand why we ought to live this life of giving, and then some obstacles and how we can overcome that, and in this lesson of living giving. First off is to realize that, let's be honest, giving, it just feels good. It feels good to give. As a dad to 4 daughters, I know I mentioned that in these lessons quite often. As a dad to 4 daughters, I love to give them gifts. I love to give my wife gifts. I love to get gifts as well. Don't get me wrong, and I certainly do. I know today is Valentine's Day, and maybe you've exchanged Valentine's gifts with your spouse, with your children, and express your love towards them. But there's just something about giving a gift to somebody that is going to be excited about that gift. I remember a couple years ago for Christmas with our twins, there was one particular gift that one of them really wanted, a particular character that she's really fallen in love with, and so she was opening this gift, and I wasn't just excited for her, but even her sisters were excited for her to open it, and just a lot of joy in receiving that gift. And it's kind of like at a birthday party with a bunch of kids. If you're the kid that brings that gift, or if you watch a kid bring a gift to a person, and they're trying to see, they want that person to open it, and they're almost there even trying to help them open it, like, please open my gift. There is joy in giving, and it simply does feel good. And this is really part of God's nature that He has built into us at creation. We are created in His image, and we're created in the image of an extremely, extremely generous God. And even though, yes, sin has stained that image in regards to man and distorted it in so many ways, there are times where that image of God leaks out in regards to us wanting to be generous. The joy of giving is certainly one of those times. And like I said, there's just nothing like watching, somebody really wanted something, and you were able to give them that, and watch them open that, and the expression of that. It simply does bring joy. And it feels good. It feels good to be able to do that. And and we know that it's been said that we can't outgive God, and that there's nothing that we can give to God that He can't give to us, even more so in return. But God even talks about, in regards to this thing about giving feels good, is that He says, you know what? I even want you to prove me. And that's what He says in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. And understanding that even at our most generous stages, we simply cannot match the fact that God is incredibly generous. We couldn't match His generosity even if we tried. Giving feels good because what we're truly doing is we are imitating Jesus in our life. Why? Because our God, right? He is a giver. We talked about that last week. And He is an extremely generous giver. And because He is an extremely generous giver, it feels good to imitate that. To be able to imitate the fact that we can give. And it's an understanding. It does. It feels good to give. But not just that. Giving helps others. We know that it helps others. Giving certainly, if we all simply gave of ourselves and lived out the Bible commandment of treating others as we would want to be treated, and we would understand that it would make our world a whole lot nicer place. It just does. Giving helps others. And really part of God's mandate, understanding this verse here in Genesis chapter 1, right, that giving feels good, and it feels good because it is one of those things that God created us to be able to enjoy, and it created us that desire to want to give. But also we know that there's a selfish desire, right? Wasn't created by God. That is a fleshly desire that is in us. But also it's an understanding that in this verse, he did tell them, look, I've given you dominion over all these things in the earth, and that there really is a mandate from God to mankind in order for us to govern this world that he's created. And as we help others, as we are generous to others in different ways, we are fulfilling God's mandate to care for those things. We get to partner with God to care well for this world. He created, but he also created the people that are in it. We have all, I think this is true for almost every person listening to this lesson, we have all been the benefactors of somebody helping us, more than likely. And man, it feels good when people come alongside you. It lets them know that you care. And the benefactor of somebody, maybe you just were struggling and maybe there was a particular utility bill that you needed help with, and another fellow Christian or someone was able to come alongside you and to help you in that. Maybe it was simply in a time of grief that you were sitting at a hospital with a sick loved one, and somebody gave of their time to come and sit with you and encourage you and uplift you and to do those things. Many of us have been the benefactor of somebody giving of themselves to us. And more than likely, many of us have also known the joy in giving of ourselves that way. We know how that particular experience can uplift someone else, and that it truly is a gift to somebody else. We understand that really nothing bad can come from giving. Sometimes we get this thought process, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the obstacles. Every so often we get this thought process that, man, if I give this, and all of a sudden we think about all the things that can go wrong. Whereas God simply gave. You ever thought about it this way? God gave his son, and Jesus willingly came to this earth, knowing that the majority would reject him. You say, well, that is a downside of giving. Well, it is a tragedy that people reject Christ. It's the biggest tragedy that has ever been. But there is nothing bad that came from Jesus giving of himself. Nothing bad can come from giving. We understand that some giving experiences, man, they are much easier than others. The harder giving experiences, they take soul work to achieve. They take hard work, planning work. If it's our best friend, or if it's our spouse, if it's our children, if it's somebody that we know and it's well planned, and oh man, a birthday party's coming up or something of that nature, that is easy to give towards. Understanding that it's still a sacrifice, I'm not diminishing that, but it's the times of inconvenience where it's the coworker that needs a moment of your time because they know that you are the Christian at your workplace, and they have come with a hardship in their life that they are looking for. Really, maybe they're looking for guidance, but really what they're probably looking for is God himself. And it's an opportunity for you to take your time and to take your even emotions of having a rough day or a long day, or you're swamped with work as well, to share Jesus with that person. That is the giving that is sometimes inconvenient. And sometimes living the giving life is just that. It takes inconvenience and us being allowing ourselves to be inconvenienced. I think one of the greatest marks of living the Christian life is to allow myself. Can I allow myself to be inconvenienced for the good of someone else? But that takes hard work to achieve. And so we understand that we are supposed to live out this giving life, right? Understanding from what we've studied here in God's Word tonight, even from 2 Corinthians and Genesis, that we are created in his image. Therefore, we know that we ought to be that of a giving person. We ought to live out this life of giving. We understand that God has given us dominion over this earth, and understanding that he has placed us as caretakers and stewards of this life that we live, and therefore we should act as him. You say, but we understand that there are things that come up in our life that are obstacles to living giving. You say, what are some of those? Well, let's be honest. One of the first things that come to mind when we talk about an obstacle for living giving is busyness. Sometimes we are just busy. Man, I'm at that time in my life myself. I was mentioning to some people that I know, they're asking how things were going, and I was thinking about just the time that we have on this earth right now, and for us as parents, Diana and I, and our kids and their ages, and they're involved in the sports and schools and music recitals and youth activities and family time, and we are just in that busy stage of life. I wouldn't trade that for anything, and I'm certainly not complaining about that. But busyness is an obstacle to living giving, and it's an understanding that if we make giving a choice, it's the choice we will rarely make. If we make giving a choice, it is a choice that we will rarely make. When possible, we have to make giving automatic. Now, in our finances, maybe that's something as simple as, in regards to our giving to the Lord's work, that's set up in automated drafts and stuff to make sure that busyness doesn't overcome that. But also, it's understanding in regards to me being generous with my time and talents that God has given me. And it's to understand that I need to make a concerted effort to plan for that, Lord, this is a time that I know that you would like for me to steward in my life a percentage of my time, a percentage of my life in order to be effective for your kingdom. And, if we don't choose that, very rarely will we be inconvenienced in that time of busyness to go out of our way to be a person that is living giving. So the first one is busyness. The second one, and I think this is true for a lot of people, is past wounds. It's like the giving to somebody who you think you're giving to them for a particular reason, and then you come to find out that you have been lied to, and that wasn't the reason that they needed that at all. Often the pain that we have received from others can keep us from being generous. It can keep us from going forward. But really the truth is that giving can actually be the thing that heals those past wounds. Once again, understanding that Jesus himself came to this earth knowing that he would be rejected, knowing that he would suffer wounds, physical wounds, emotional wounds, and that he would do that all for people to reject him. Jesus knew that at the time of his crucifixion, that most of his followers would disperse. That the one that was vehemently behind him, Peter, would deny him. People would say, well, those are wounds. I mean, you're talking about damage that is emotional, verbal, all these different things. And yet, Jesus gave. He gave. And understanding that, once again, no bad can come from giving. And we cannot allow past wounds to be the excuse we use in order not to help someone else. Rather, we ought to let living giving be that thing that heals those past wounds. And it certainly can. Understanding that, when we do so, we must do so cheerfully and as the Bible commands. But understanding that past wounds aren't a good excuse for that. Another obstacle to living giving is the fear of the future. It's the fear of the future. It's fearful giving, not knowing what tomorrow holds, especially financially. And trust me, I'm not saying to be unwise and those things. In fact, I'm saying the exact opposite of that. It's understanding that God has commanded us to give. Therefore, it is my obligation to give to him by faith and obedience, understanding that is what he has asked of us and that he requires of us in order for us to live in obedience to him. And we know that only when we live in obedience to him can blessings flow. But two things are really important to keep in mind to keep fear from robbing you of the joy of giving. First and foremost is, even though I don't know what tomorrow holds in regards to, my finances or my time, whatever that may be. And I don't know if tomorrow my cars that have a lot of miles on it will be their last time that they actually crank up, and then all of a sudden I'm having to look and buy a new car. I don't know what tomorrow holds. But what I do know is that I do know who holds tomorrow. And, I don't control the future, and neither do you. But yet sometimes we give as if we can control the future. But the sheer fact is we can't. Now, I believe in setting aside and being prudent and with our resources that God has given us and to take care of our family. Trust me, I'm not saying anything that is against that, but rather, and I'm certainly not trying to say to be financially irresponsible. But what I am saying is that we cannot let the fear of the future stop us from giving today. And a way that we work to that is first understanding I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. But also understanding that I have a responsibility, I think the Bible teaches, to be fiscally responsible by creating that little bit of separation in order to where if something was to take place, and to be a good steward of my resources, and to allow myself to be able to be a giver. Obstacles to living giving are real. Nobody is saying they're not. Busyness, past wounds, fear of the future, they can be difficult to overcome. But it is always worthwhile to be more generous. The benefits of generosity far outweighs any sort of cost to get there. And and these obstacles, as real as they may seem, will rob you of that joy if you let them. And so, you say, I think we talked about this a little bit last week. No, we did. And we saw that the person that is a generous person, as God is, very often these are the happiest people that you know, the most joyful people that you know. Why? Because they understand they don't let these obstacles get in the way of living giving. They don't appear to be missing out on parts of life by not protecting themselves or from past wounds or hoarding their stuff even more. Instead, they seem to live a life of contentment because they understand that giving is simply what should flow out from serving the most generous God. In fact, most big-hearted givers, they don't even realize that they're generous. It is just, they've made it a way of life. And so we understand that we must do the same. So how do we overcome those obstacles to living giving? Most of us are very generous in our best moments. It's when we actually, if I could just use a money analogy, it's when we actually do have cash in our pocket, which is very rare for most people these days. Most of us just use some sort of card transaction, or I hardly even use that anymore. Most of the time I just use my phone and for an electronic transaction. But have cash, and all of a sudden, there's a need right in front of me that I can readily do because it's extra. And most of us are most generous in our best moments. But rather, understanding that to live this generous life, once again, we're not talking about giving at one time, we're talking about living giving. One spiritual practice for releasing God's generosity is the spiritual discipline of fasting, of prayer and fasting. You say, well, what does that have to do one with the other? Well, Isaiah chapter 58 verse 6 says, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and let the oppressed go free? And that ye break every yoke. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh?" And it goes on to say a few more things here in Isaiah chapter 58. But we can see the connection between giving of ourselves to another, right? The bread to the hungry, poor, and those that are without, and we see them and to help comfort them. And we can see the connection that God is making here in His Word between this matter of prayer and fasting, and also it turning into generosity. Prayer and fasting accomplishes several things in our life. A lot of what it accomplishes, it draws us closer to God, and helps us hear him better. A lot of it is it breaks the power of influence and that rule over us. Prayer and fasting is intended to increase our ability to live and love, generously shining the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what prayer and fasting is for. And so, how can I turn this thing of prayer and fasting into living giving? And so, we understand that things do take hold on us that sometimes skew what we should think about something. So, if we just look at a few of these things that help us to overcome those obstacles. The first one is living giving is surrendering. Living giving is surrendering. How am I going to overcome the obstacle of busyness, past wounds, fear of the future, and the several others that are out there? Well, I understand that I have to be surrendered each and every day to this matter of living giving. I'm going to surrender my day. Understanding I'm going to surrender that day to the Lord. I'm going to surrender even my family. Understanding that my family belongs to Christ first and not to me. Understanding that I'm going to give him that. I'm going to give him and I'm going to surrender my future. I don't control it. We can live in the freedom of not worrying about what is to come next when we understand I don't control it. God does, and I can give him that if I would simply surrender to his knowledge of what he would have me to do tomorrow and simply live as I'm supposed to live for him today. Living giving is also creating margin. You say, well, what does that mean? Well, margin really is the space between our load and our limits. Margin may be the gap between rest and exhaustion. And it's that thing that, and for this is that margin between being generous or hoarding what God has given us and not living in generosity. And understanding that, much of life's ministry that he has taught us to happens in these margins that we create. And so we have to carefully budget our time and resources and in order to find those things that can be given more. Say, what am I supposed to create margin for? I think we create margin in our time. Understanding that time is precious. It is the one thing that man can't defeat and man can't get back. Nobody has ever created a time machine in order to move forward or to recreate the past. And I need to understand that time is a precious resource. Understand that my mind is also a precious resource. And we let so many things control our mind. I know I do myself, and many of us are guilty of that. But God tells us that we can bring every thought into captivity. And so I need to create those margins, understanding that my mind is precious. I can create those margins in my emotion and also in my finances. Why? Because if I create those things that have margin, once again, it's where we operate, and then I can understand that I can more easily give to others. Living giving is also praying. It's praying, and it's very simple. It's also praying. And how am I going to overcome those obstacles? Well, I first understand that I have to surrender each and every day. It's surrendering. It's creating those margins. Once again, it's understanding that I have to make time for that and creating that opportunity in my life with those things that God has given me. But it's also praying. It's praying. Prayer doesn't happen by accident. Prayer has to be something that is very, you have to be intent on it. I think it's easier at times to read instead of pray. Because you can read and it'll captivate your mind. But prayer a lot of times is putting away everything else, including those thoughts that just intrude all the time when you're trying to speak to the Lord. But we have to be intent on praying. Prayer requires planning and work. And when we're praying, we have to understand that we're praying for the right thing. A couple weeks ago, we had a couple lessons on prayer and how we can influence our friends for prayer and how we can be productive in our prayer. And we want to do that. We want to pray for others. We want to pray for the opportunity to give towards others. We want to pray for opportunities. Lord, give me the opportunity to be giving of myself. Then living giving also is fasting. I want to be able to overcome these obstacles that keep me from living giving, and therefore I have to be willing to fast. I have to be willing to fast. Fasting has a way, once again, releasing the power of stuff that stuff has over us. As we fast, we are reminded that man does not live by bread alone. But that's also, man does not live by bread alone and stuff, right? All the electronics and all the things of today, all the conveniences of today that we rely on, we don't live off of those things. Well, we're not supposed to live off of those things. So what does fasting do in our life? I mentioned this just a little bit ago, but fasting decreases the power of stuff. That things have power over us. I have, full disclosure, I was getting my haircut this past week, and I was talking just about some things that can be very addicting in our life. And it was funny, me and the person that was cutting my hair, we shared this same addiction. I am addicted to diet sodas, and in fact, you see my cup here to the left, it is full of Diet Coke. And you say, should I fast from that? Absolutely, it's something that I could fast from. Understanding that hopefully it doesn't have power over me. I struggle with it, but it should not have power over us. And when we fast, it decreases the power of stuff. Whatever can control us has that power over us. Fasting also increases our ability to hear from God and to trust God. When I hear His voice, I trust Him. And that increases with fasting. Fasting releases increased faith and turns it into action. And so with fasting, we saw that from Isaiah, that this is the fast. And therefore that fast then created action. And that's what effective prayer and effective fasting does, is it turns something that we did into something that we are going to do. And understanding that God would not have us sit on our resources, but rather to release that to help others. God is a very giving God. We understand that. He has created you also, though, to also be very giving. He is generous. Therefore, He wants us to be generous, just as He is. And practicing generosity is the best way for you to live your life and for me to live my life. This theme that we have, enriched in everything. How can I be enriched in everything? Well, I understand that first lesson, I serve a giving God. He is giving. He is extremely generous. And because of that, the second lesson is He wants me to have a life of living giving. Understanding that His generosity has called me to action. And yes, there are some real obstacles in the way of that. But I can overcome those obstacles by prayer and fasting and surrendering and creating that opportunity in my life and not allowing things to control my effort to give, but rather allow Him to expressly give out of me. Why? Because He is generous. He has created me. He lives inside me, and therefore my generosity should flow out to others. That is living giving. And that is a way that we can claim the promise of 2 Corinthians, our theme verse, to be enriched in everything.